Hey guys, tonight we step softly into a world where winter wasn't just a season. It was a test of survival, a daily grind of cold bones, smoky cottages, and an endless search for warmth in all its forms. You're standing at the edge of a medieval village, somewhere in 14th century England, or maybe the Frankish countryside. It's hard to tell through the fog. Snow crunches underfoot. You can see your breath. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster is deeply confused about the hour. The sky is already losing its blue as the sun dips behind bare trees. Thatched roofs are dusted with frost, and smoke rises lazily from crooked chimneys. Peasants are herding in their sheep. Yes, sheep at curfews, and wooden doors creak closed against the biting wind. You're not exactly welcome here yet. You're cold, muddy, and let's be honest, you probably won't survive this night unless you learn very quickly how things work. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments. Curious to see who else is time traveling with us. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You tug your cloak tighter. It's damp, of course. Everything is damp. Medieval winters aren't cute. They're stubborn. Most of the houses are small, one-room cottages made of wattle and daub, basically mud, twigs, and wishful thinking. The roofs leak. The windows, if there are any, are covered in animal horn or oiled cloth, and they don't keep much out except hope. Inside one of the homes, it smells like wood smoke, wet wool, and old onions. You've entered without knocking. It's fine. Privacy isn't a big deal here. A dog barely looks up. A woman stirs something thick and grayish in a cauldron. A man knocks snow from his boots, while 3 children huddle on a bench beside the hearth, wrapped in what appears to be a former curtain. This is peak cozy by peasant standards. The first order of business: bring in the firewood. It's stacked haphazardly by the hearth. Anyone who's anyone in this village knows you can't let it sit outside. Wet logs mean no fire. No fire means cold stew. Cold stew means despair. Historically, the twilight hours were a rush. Animals had to be fed, tools brought inside, water collected before it turned solid. Scholars still argue whether winter evenings encouraged more cooperation or simply more yelling. Possibly both. You're sent outside again, because apparently you've been volunteered to help bring in the last of the chickens. They're peevish and refuse to go quietly. One of them definitely bites. Medieval poultry has no chill. But soon, the chores are done. The door is bolted with a wooden beam. This is the moment when the cold is finally shut out. Mostly. The wind sneaks in through the walls. The thatch creaks ominously. But inside, the glow of the fire casts long shadows, and everything smells slightly like turnips and feet. Now begins the slow slide into night. It's not glamorous. It's not peaceful. It's tolerable. The stew is served with hunks of black bread, chewed slowly because your jaw is already cold. Conversation is minimal. People are tired. But the quiet isn't lonely. It's full of the tiny noises of life. The slosh of a ladle, the crackle of logs, the occasional fart from a goat in the corner. You sit on a stool, finally warming up. Someone tosses you a blanket that's more whole than fabric. You say thank you anyway. There's a kind of magic to this moment. Not the wand-waving sort, but the real, earthy kind. This family has survived every winter so far. Their house might not be insulated, their diet might be tragic, but they're still here. And that counts for something. As you sip a mug of lukewarm ale, you'd prefer tea, but that's centuries away. You realize that life here revolves around this evening ritual. Finish your work. Seal the cold out. Gather close. Survive. A few logs pop in the fire. One of the kids is falling asleep with a cat wrapped around their neck. And that's when you hear it, a distant howl. Probably a wolf. Or maybe just a drunk neighbor singing badly. You won't be checking. Sleep will come soon. But before it does, there are a dozen more layers of night to peel back. Because this is just twilight, and the coldest hours are still ahead. You're still warming your fingers by the hearth when someone hands you a tunic that smells faintly of sheep and very strongly of smoke. It's thick, stiff, and clearly mended more times than you can count. Welcome to the world of medieval layering, where surviving winter meant bundling up like a cabbage in whatever you could find, or steal from your cousin. Most peasants didn't own wardrobes. They had a garment, singular, if you were lucky, too. And on the coldest nights, you wore both, plus your cloak, plus a rag wrapped around your head. And if things got really grim, you might stuff straw or dry moss between layers. Not exactly breathable, but who's worried about sweat when your nose is turning blue? Wool was the gold standard. Scratchy, sure, but it held heat even when wet. You try not to scratch your neck. The tunic's collar is fraying, and someone's added little stitches in red thread that look suspiciously like runes or chickens. Fashion wasn't a thing yet, but superstition was. Historians still argue whether peasant embroidery had symbolic intent or was just whatever pattern your grandmother remembered mid-stitch. Your host family is now layering up for bed. The father pulls on a second pair of hose, tied at the knee with wool strips, and the mother disappears under a cloak that might once have been a sail. No one changes clothes for sleep. What you wear all day is what you wear all night. A tunic, a hood, maybe some socks if they haven't been repurposed as mittens. Undergarments? Debatable. Honestly, best not to ask. It's a practical sort of elegance. Every piece of clothing must serve multiple functions. That cloak you're wrapped in? It's been used as a blanket, a picnic cloth, a grain sack, and, during one memorable sheep chase, a makeshift lasso. You're handed a woolen cap and told to mind your ears. Frostbite was no joke, and while you might not lose your fingers, ears were often the first to go. Someone in the village, you think it's the baker, wears a hat all year because one winter he didn't. Lesson learned. Not everything is handmade, either. At the annual fair, you could trade eggs, onions, or goat milk for second-hand garments. Of course, those came with stories, and not always good ones. There's a running village legend about a pair of breeches that belonged to a man who saw a ghost and never farmed straight again. They've since been cut up into mittens. You shift in your too small shoes. They're made of leather, if you're lucky. Stuffed with straw, definitely. On warmer days, peasants often went barefoot. But in winter, footwear was survival. You've heard some folks even wrap their feet in cabbage leaves under their shoes. It's not fashionable. It's frost protection. The jokes fly fast this evening. Someone compares their cloak to a dead cow. Another swears their tunic once belonged to a knight, though judging by the smell, the knight died in it. Laughter bubbles up despite the chill. Because when you're dressed in every scrap you own, sitting in a room full of other similarly lumpy, awkwardly bundled people, the absurdity starts to feel a little warm itself. You try moving your arms. It's like swimming in a haystack. Someone hands you a mug of something warm. Mulled ale, maybe? You take a sip. It tastes like raisins and regret. But it's heating you from the inside. That's the real point. There's a strange kind of dignity in all these mismatched layers. You're not dressed for a party. You're dressed for war. A silent, creeping war against the kind of cold that could find its way through stone and skin and settle deep in your bones. And that's what layering was. Armor. Not just against temperature, but against the humiliation of owning nothing new, nothing soft, nothing beautiful. You wrapped yourself in what little you had and faced the night anyway. A kid toddles by wearing what appears to be a cloak made entirely of patched-up tunic sleeves. It drags behind him like a wizard's robe. He's grinning. You can't help but smile back. Because somehow, despite the musty wool and the clumsy stitches, it's working. You're warmer now. The cold is still there, humming against the door, sneaking through cracks, but it hasn't won. Not yet. And as the fire flickers low, and the family settles deeper into their layers, you feel it. A strange sense of coziness, of solidarity. You're not alone in the cold. You're part of a community that has faced it every year, for generations, and come through the other side wrapped in cabbage leaf shoes and second-hand breeches, and somehow still laughing. The fire is winding down, though it still gives off a faint orange glow, casting warped shadows along the smoke-darkened beams of the ceiling. You shuffle closer, tugging your borrowed cloak around your knees, wondering how on earth anyone sleeps like this. You're stiff, you're itchy, and the wooden bench is about as forgiving as a frozen log. And then someone gestures toward the sleeping corner with a lazy thumb. You follow the nod. The bed. If that's what we're calling it. It's essentially a low wooden frame packed with straw. There's a wool blanket thrown over the top and, beneath that, evidence of several generations of sleep. Lumpy. Musty. Very lived in. No pillows in sight, just a few rolled-up cloaks and maybe a burlap sack stuffed with moss. The idea of personal space? That's not invented yet. This isn't your bed. It's the bed. For everyone. The parents climb in first, then the youngest child gets tucked in next to the mother, and then the older kids pile in wherever there's room. There's a lot of shuffling, some giggling, an argument over foot placement. One child is sleeping with their feet by the pillow and their head at the footboard, which no one questions. And then they wave you in. You hesitate, but only for a second, because the cold is right there, gnawing at your ankles like a hungry mouse. You step over the dog, sidestep the go-to-sleep in the corner, and wedge yourself into the communal straw heap. Immediately, you are warmer. The body heat of 6 other people and one very toasty cat is no joke. It's not elegant. Someone is definitely breathing directly into your ear. One of the children kicks in their sleep. The father snores with a heroic sort of rhythm. But the warmth? Glorious. This practice, known in modern terms as bundling, was more than just practical. It was essential. Even in wealthier homes, people often slept 2 or more to a bed. In the peasant world, communal sleep was simply the norm. Historians still argue whether this closeness bred stronger family bonds, or just really good gossip. Probably both. You shift slightly, trying not to wake the child now curled against your ribcage like a hedgehog. You're grateful for the warmth, but also struck by how casual it all is. No pre-sleep rituals, no brushing of teeth, no nightly scroll through a glowing rectangle. Just bed. Cold. Sleep. And yes, the straw is poking you in every conceivable direction. There are strange creaks and rustles from beneath the blanket that you hope are just leftover turnip skins. But you're surviving. Some households slept on simple mats on the floor, while others raised their beds on low platforms to avoid the worst of the drafts. A few might even have hanging curtains made of wool to trap heat, but not here. This family has the essentials: bodies, blankets, and the closeness that comes from generations of sleeping this way. Someone lets out a deep sigh. The kind of sigh that says, "Well, I didn't die today. Time to shut down until sunrise." And here's something funny you probably didn't expect. People didn't always sleep through the night in one solid block. In medieval times, it was common for folks to have two sleeps, a first sleep from dusk to midnight or so, followed by a period of quiet wakefulness where they might tend the fire, pray, whisper, or even sneak next door for a visit. Then, the second sleep until dawn. You're definitely in the first sleep now. Everything's quiet except for the hiss of the fire and the occasional shifting straw. Your feet are actually warm. A miracle. You think about how different sleep is in your world. Mattresses, memory foam, white noise machines, lavender spray. But here, survival trumps luxury. Comfort isn't optional. It's something you build, together, with breath and blankets and shared body heat. There's something oddly reassuring about it, about being in it with others. If someone turns in their sleep, the whole bed jiggles. If the fire sputters out, everyone wakes up. If the dog barks, there's a collective grunt of irritation. You're not alone. The concept of sleeping alone, of having your own mattress, your own room, your own temperature-controlled bubble, would seem strange, even sad, to this world. Here, sleep is a shared activity, a nightly collaboration. And yeah, it smells a bit like wet wool and unwashed feet. But it's also kind of beautiful. You nestle deeper into the straw, ignoring the prickly bits. Someone murmurs in their sleep, and you recognize only half the words. Maybe a dream about goats, or cheese, or goat cheese. The cold is still out there, scraping its fingers against the windows and hissing through the chimney. But inside this straw-stuffed cocoon of a bed, it feels far away. You are wrapped in warmth, in human messiness, in something that isn't comfortable but is undeniably safe. For now. It's sometime past midnight when you wake to the hiss of cooling embers and the soft grunt of someone shifting nearby. Your shoulders numb, your knees pinned under a surprisingly heavy child, and the cat has made itself king of your chest. But it's not the discomfort that wakes you. It's the absence of warmth where the fire used to be. This is the part of the night where the hearth becomes the center of gravity. You squint across the dark room. The last log is now a ghostly ember, pulsing weakly like a red eye. You can feel the cold reasserting itself, slowly at first, like it's checking to see if it's welcome. Then bolder. The floorboards start to creak differently. The dog shifts closer to the warmest body it can find. That body might be you. Congratulations. The hearth isn't just for heat. It's the emotional and physical anchor of the home. Meals, stories, chores, even minor surgeries. It all happens around the fire. When it dims, the house breathes differently. And now someone's stirring. It's the mother, wrapped in 2 cloaks and a scarf. She's already halfway to the fireplace with practiced steps, not even bothering with shoes. She doesn't groan, doesn't curse. This is just part of the job. Keeping the hearth alive is a nightly act of survival, and often a woman's domain. She crouches, pokes at the ash, and there it is, a still glowing coal, buried in gray. You hear her breathe a soft sigh of relief. Historians still argue whether medieval women had specific nighttime rituals for tending fires, or whether they simply learned by doing. Either way, you're watching a master at work. She adds a few slivers of dry kindling, tinder kept tucked in a pouch beside the hearth, and blows gently. The ember flares. A flame catches. The room, for a moment, comes back to life. Now, you might be wondering, why not just keep the fire roaring all night? Simple answer: wood. It's scarce. It's precious. and most of it is damp. Peasants gathered fallen branches, twigs, and whatever they could find. Cutting down live trees was usually illegal, especially in lord-owned forests. So unless you had a secret stash or access to peat or dung fuel, yes, exactly what you think it is, firewood had to be used wisely. A clever trick? Covering embers with ash to bank the fire overnight. The ash acts as insulation, allowing coals to smolder instead of going out completely. It's not flashy, but it works. You're watching it work now. As the flames return, so does the warmth. It creeps back into the room like an old cat, not fast, not loud, but persistent. The children don't wake. The goat sighs. You shift just enough to get feeling back in your arm. The woman tosses in a small log and returns to bed like a ghost in a blanket. No one speaks. This isn't a moment for chatter. Just a quiet victory against the creeping cold. The hearth is also where stories happen, especially in the hours between first and second sleep. Tonight, things are quiet. But on other nights, this is when tales are whispered, about the time old Thomas' beard caught fire, or when a fox snuck in and tried to nap in the ashes like a cat. And then there are the superstitions. Some believe the fire has a spirit, usually feminine, that must be respected. Don't spit into it. Don't sweep ashes at night. Always thank the flame, even if silently. Earlier in the evening, someone muttered a rhyme before placing a log. You thought it was just a joke, but now you realize, maybe not. The hearth is warmth, yes. But it's also memory, ritual, even magic. There's a charred wooden spoon hanging near the mantel. No one uses it anymore. It's warped beyond reason, but no one dares throw it out either. It belonged to someone's great-grandmother, and it's been here longer than the roof. When something breaks in the house, someone touches that spoon and mutters, she'd know what to do. You feel a shiver run through you, but not from the cold. From the sheer weight of continuity in this room. The fire crackles louder now. Orange light flickers across the ceiling beams again. You can see the shape of the broom by the door, the glint of a cooking pot. Life, suspended but still moving. Eventually, your eyes grow heavy again. The straw bed may be pokey, but your bones are warmer now. The fire has done its job. As you drift off, you wonder how many nights this hearth has guarded. How many winters it has seen through. How many feet, frozen and desperate, it has welcomed back to life. And you think, maybe it's not just firewood. Maybe it really is a kind of quiet spirit. One that lives not in the flame, but in the faces gathered around it. You wake again, this time to a faint noise that isn't the crackle of the fire or the soft snoring from the bed. It's the quiet, repetitive clink of metal, like tiny bells or coins jangling in a pouch. You blink and realize it's the village blacksmith, making his early morning rounds before dawn. Medieval peasants didn't just freeze in place while the cold wrapped tighter. They had routines to keep the blood flowing, even in the darkest hours. The blacksmith's hammer was a vital soundtrack to the village, echoing in rhythm with the wind outside. His work wasn't just about tools and horseshoes. It was a lifeline for everyone. You stretch stiff limbs and quietly slip from the communal bed, careful not to disturb the warm bodies pressed around you like a tangled puzzle. You're still wearing the same layers, now stiff from sleep and cold. As you step outside, the breath hits you in soft white clouds. The night is still, but the air bites sharper than before. Outside, the village is hushed but not silent. A few early risers are stoking their small fires or fetching water from the frozen well. There's a sense of quiet purpose, a collective resistance to the cold night's grip. Your breath mingles with theirs in the cold air. There's a shared understanding here, unspoken but deeply felt. Winter is a test, a time when the village's strength and endurance come together like the interlocking fingers of a warm hand. You watch as the blacksmith works, his hammer sparking tiny showers of light, a small beacon in the darkness. His forge glows orange, a second hearth for the village. Without him, tools would break, shoes would fail, and the wheels of daily life would slow to a halt. There's a rhythm to this cold survival, a cycle of tending fires, repairing tools, fetching water, and sharing warmth. Every task is a piece of the puzzle, an essential thread woven into the fabric of the night. As dawn edges closer, the cold slowly begins to relent, but the lessons of the night remain etched in your bones. Warmth is precious, community is vital, and even the smallest spark can keep the darkness at bay. The early light seeps through cracks in the wooden walls, casting pale stripes on the straw floor. You rub your eyes and stretch, the cold still lingering in your bones, but the fire slowly rekindled from the night's embers. The day has begun, but the chill hasn't left the village yet. Medieval peasants didn't have central heating or cozy radiators. Their mornings started with simple, often chilly routines designed to conserve heat and energy. The first order of business: getting the body moving without wasting precious warmth. You watch the family begin their day with small, deliberate movements. The mother tends to the hearth, coaxing flames back to life while the children gather firewood from the corner. The father fetches water from a frozen well, his breath forming clouds that disappear quickly in the cold air. You join in, feeling the snap of frozen twigs underfoot and the sharp bite of frost in the air. It's a world where every action must balance effort and economy. Too much movement wastes energy. Too little risks the cold creeping back into your muscles. Historians still debate the exact techniques peasants used to maximize warmth in their daily tasks. Some suggest early forms of insulation. Moss tucked into walls or layers of fabric hung over doors were more widespread than previously thought. Others argue that survival hinged more on sheer endurance and communal support than on material innovation. As you gather kindling, you notice how the villagers work together in quiet cooperation. There's no hurry, just a steady, rhythmic flow of tasks that keeps the village functioning. It's a dance choreographed by necessity, where everyone knows their part. You return inside, the fire now crackling warmly, and help prepare a simple breakfast. Oat porridge steams in a clay pot, its nutty aroma filling the room. Food was as much about fuel as pleasure, a necessary energy boost to face the day's cold. Oddly, you learn that some peasants believed certain herbs added to porridge could help stave off winter chills. Whether this was true or just hopeful thinking is still a matter of debate among scholars. You decide to imagine that those herbs did their magic, at least enough to keep spirits warm. The day stretches ahead, cold but manageable, held together by rituals old as time. And as the sun climbs higher, you feel a quiet respect for those who lived and thrived in such a demanding world, where every morning was a small victory against the cold. You've been up for a few hours now, enough time to gather kindling, sip a second bowl of hot porridge, and rub your hands together until your knuckles crack, but the cold still clings. Not biting exactly, just persistent. Like a cat that won't stop sitting on your chest. Then you hear it, a dull thud, followed by a groan, followed by an unmistakable curse, quickly muttered into a scarf. The neighbor's fire has gone out. There's a shared pause in your household. The father raises an eyebrow. The mother doesn't stop stirring her pot but glances toward the door. This is serious. When the fire dies, it's not just an inconvenience, it's a mini crisis. There's no striking a match or flipping a switch. If the coals are cold, you're in trouble. And that's where ember napping comes in. Yes, ember napping. An actual thing. You follow your host father across the muddy lane to the neighbor's cottage, where a small group is already gathered around a blackened hearth, looking dejected and slightly embarrassed. One of the children was supposed to bank the coals under ash last night. They forgot. And now, their only option is to borrow heat from someone else. This is where community matters. Every villager knows how easy it is to lose the fire. Maybe your kindling was too damp. Maybe the wind blew through a loose shutter. Maybe you just slept too hard. There's no judgment here, just a quiet understanding. So the solution. Someone produces a small, scorched clay pot with a lid. This is a fire pot, or in some regions, a chafing jar, used precisely for these moments. You place hot embers inside, cover them, and walk them across the village like a slow, careful courier of life. You're volunteered to carry it. Naturally. The jar is heavier than expected, radiating heat like a sleepy animal. You walk carefully, both hands wrapped in wool to avoid burns, while the cold air nips gleefully at your ears. Inside the neighbor's cottage, the hearth is quickly cleared. Twigs and dry moss are set carefully on the grate. The embers are tucked underneath, and the mother, her hands cracked from years of winter mornings, blows gently until the first flicker of orange returns. There's no applause, just nods. Quiet satisfaction. Fire restored. Day saved. Historians still argue whether fire-sharing rituals had legal or spiritual significance. In some regions, it was seen as an obligation. Refusing to share embers could mark you as a bad neighbor or even draw suspicion of witchcraft. Elsewhere, it was simply a survival tactic. One flame serving many. You head back across the lane, your face stinging less with each step. The act of kindling one another's fires builds more than warmth, it builds trust. Now that you're attuned to it, you start noticing signs of fire ingenuity everywhere. A woman drying pine cones by the hearth to use as fire starters. A pile of peat bricks stacked in the corner, crumbling, smelly, but effective. A small child diligently fluffing up sheep dung, which, yes, also burns, and yes, you pretend not to notice the smell. In some areas, peasants line their chimneys with herbs like rosemary or lavender, not just for the faint scent, but because they believed the smoke would ward off illness. Did it work? Hard to say. But it made the room smell slightly less like damp wool and turnips. Back in your borrowed cottage, someone has placed a new log on the fire, and a pot of what might be cabbage stew simmers slowly. You're struck again by how dependent everything is on this one flickering flame. Without it, you don't eat. You don't dry your boots. You don't stay alive. And the thought sneaks in, maybe the hearth is more than a hearth. Maybe it's the heartbeat of this world. One you keep alive not just for yourself, but for everyone. You step back outside after lunch, such as it was. A thin broth with more root than meat, and bread so hard you could use it as a doorstop. Still, it's warm, and at this point, warmth is currency. Now, it's chore time. Not optional, not seasonal. In the medieval peasant's world, survival is an all-day affair, and winter doesn't excuse you from labor. It just makes it significantly harder to enjoy. Today's task? Gathering fuel. Not firewood, mind you. You're not allowed to just go lopping branches off trees like some kind of forest outlaw. Most of the woodland belongs to the local lord, and technically, every twig and squirrel in it is his property. There are laws about that. Harsh ones. So instead, you and your host family head toward the fields in search of what peasants euphemistically called ground fuel. A charming term for basically whatever will burn and isn't nailed down. Dried roots. Twigs. Dung. Yes, again with the dung. But this time, it's from cows and sheep, carefully collected and shaped into roundish patties months earlier. now dry enough to burn like a charm. As you walk, your boots squish in half-frozen mud. The air smells faintly of ash, manure, and wet moss. Strangely invigorating, in a bleak, "Congratulations, you're alive" kind of way. You pause as the eldest daughter stops to harvest a few sprigs of dry gorse. It's prickly, but it burns hot. Peasants knew their flora like modern folks know coffee orders. Gorse for kindling, birch bark if you're lucky, peat for a long, slow heat. Moss and hay in a pinch. There's a sort of grim creativity to it. One family once made kindling from broken thatch swept off a collapsing roof. Another used old shoe soles. Someone even tried dried fish skins. Spoiler, that didn't catch, but the smell lingered for weeks. Historians still argue whether these rural fuel-gathering practices were born purely from necessity or also served communal purposes. An excuse to check on neighbors, share gossip, or compare the merits of moss versus straw. Either way, it wasn't done alone. You're learning this firsthand. The group works together, scanning hedgerows, stuffing twigs into woven baskets, stomping on frosted cow pies to test for burnability. There's a lot of laughter. Someone makes a joke about finding a premium log. It's, of course, just a very sad branch. As the sun inches lower, you finally trudge back to the cottage with your haul. It's not glamorous, but it's enough to get the fire through the night. Back home, the spoils are sorted. Twigs for the hearth, dung pucks for the iron stove. Yes, there's one, barely held together with rivets and prayers, and a small cache of bark kept for serious cold, like the kind that freezes your breath mid-sentence. It's in these moments, surrounded by damp wool, tired feet, and the unmistakable scent of dried sheep poo, that you begin to understand something critical. Warmth wasn't just something medieval peasants hoped for. It was something they hunted for. With sharp eyes, with stiff backs, with patience and persistence. They combed their landscape for heat like miners panning for gold. And every stick, every scrap, every crumb of burnable matter was precious. Back inside, someone starts placing the kindling near the fire. Not into the fire, near it. Too early for that. Fires were timed carefully. The bigger the blaze now, the colder you'd be later. A child sneezes. A dog stretches. And outside, a crow calls across the gray sky like a reminder. Winter isn't over yet. But you've got a basket of gorse, a cloak that still smells faintly of stew, and a hearth ready to burn again tonight. The war against winter is still on, but today you've scored a tiny win. Evening falls faster than you'd expect. One moment the sun's a watery disk just above the horizon, and the next it's gone, like someone yanked it down behind the trees with a rope. The cold returns instantly, pressing against the door like it's trying to listen in. Inside, the room changes. The chores wind down. The goat is tucked into its corner with a half blanket. Yes, that's a thing. And dinner is reduced to licking the last of the broth off wooden bowls. Now comes the sacred time of doing absolutely nothing, but in a way that still fends off the cold. They call it gossip hour. Not officially, of course, but you can tell. You sit close to the fire, shoulder to shoulder with the others, the flames painting everyone's faces in soft oranges and golds. No one moves much. There's no more work to do, no books to read, no clocks to beat. Just fire, company, and time. You listen as stories flow, some real, some wildly not. Like the tale of a man in the next village who wore 3 tunics, for hoods, and still caught frostbite because he forgot to wrap his feet. Or the one about a traveling monk who carried hot stones in his sleeves and accidentally set fire to his manuscripts. You snort quietly into your sleeve. One of the girls starts knitting. the rhythm of her hands matching the crackle of the fire. Another peasant pulls out a bone-carved flute. He plays something slow and droning, oddly soothing, like the musical equivalent of thick soup. This is more than passing time. This is defensive idleness, a way to guard against the creeping psychological cold. Because when you can't go outside, and the sun's gone for 15 hours, and everything aches from cold or labor, your mind needs warmth too. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers told stories mainly to entertain, to educate, or to preserve memory. Probably all three. In these moments, tales become blankets. Someone tells a story about the Frost Lady, a spirit who visits in the night and brushes her fingers across your windows, leaving frozen patterns like vines. If you leave her milk, she lets you sleep. If you forget, she pinches your toes. You glance at your toes, which are currently under 2 layers of wool, just in case. This spirit-sharing moment has a name, though you wouldn't know it yet: domestic folklore. These weren't just ghost stories. They were a way of making sense of the strange, silent forces of winter. Why some chimneys smoked backward, why bread dough wouldn't rise on certain days, why some winters came with more death than others. The father talks about ice sickness, a term peasants used for winter lethargy. It wasn't depression in the modern sense, but it was known. If you lay around too long, you got sleep heavy, your blood went slow, your thoughts grew dark. The cure: laughter, company, or a walk around the barn barefoot, which sounds less like a cure and more like a dare. A few neighbors drift in during the evening. They carry small bundles of wool to spin, scraps of cloth to mend, or just themselves. One has a hand warmer made from a hollowed gourd filled with coals. It smells faintly like burnt porridge, but no one complains. The fire burns steadily, thanks to the dung collected earlier. You didn't expect to be thankful for that, but here we are. The conversation turns to small mysteries. Why chickens sleep so soundly, whether soup tastes better if it's stirred counterclockwise, if St. Martin really froze his nose off, or if that's just what grandmothers say to get kids to wear their scarves. You feel yourself smiling. There's no agenda here, no rush. Just the flickering firelight, the occasional shared laugh, and the warmth that comes not just from flame, but from presence. Even in the coldest centuries, during what historians now call the Little Ice Age, villages like this endured not just because of practical knowledge, but because of moments like this. Shared space, shared stories, a refusal to freeze alone. Eventually, someone yawns. It triggers a chain reaction. The girl sets down her knitting. The flute disappears. People start gathering their cloaks and preparing for the second sleep. But before they go, someone adds one more log to the fire, just in case. The flames rise up in gratitude, and for one last moment, the whole room is golden. The house darkens again, but not completely. The fire's still going, quieter now, more amber than flame. Shadows stretch across the walls like slow dancers, and the room has slipped into that in-between world of half-sleep. You lie back on the straw mattress, limbs tangled with others, cloaks pulled up to chins. There's no such thing as personal space here. Not in the winter. This, you learn, is the time of the second sleep. In medieval Europe, sleep didn't happen in one long stretch. People often drifted off after nightfall, woke around midnight for an hour or two, then went back to sleep until dawn. It was so common that people didn't even find it odd. It was simply how the body worked. During this waking window, families might whisper, pray, check the fire, or sneak a sip of leftover ale. And yes, sometimes people got up to, well, we'll keep things PG and just say, chat privately with their spouses. You, however, are not in the mood for chatting. Your nose is cold, your toes are colder, and the straw beneath you is doing its best impression of a porcupine. You shift slightly. The child next to you lets out a snore so tiny and high-pitched it sounds like a sleepy mouse. You smile into the dark. Outside, frost begins forming on the shutters. Inside, someone quietly places a pot near the fire to warm for the morning. You notice another small ritual, a spoon tucked into the ashes, handle poking out. You're not sure if it's symbolic or just absent-minded. Could be both. Historians still debate whether the practice of segmented sleep had health benefits. Some argue it aligned with natural circadian rhythms, making people more restful. Others think it was born of necessity, when fire, hunger, and livestock demanded vigilance throughout the night. Either way, the second sleep was part of the rhythm, a space between the world of effort and the world of dreams. The air inside the house is warmer now than it's been all day. The fire's hard work has finally sunk into the walls, into the clothes, into you. You wrap your cloak tighter, nestle in, and let your eyes slip shut. A creak from the rafters above. Probably just the beams contracting in the cold. Or maybe something less scientific and more folkloric. After all, the villagers do say that old wood remembers. You decide not to ask what that means. Someone hums softly. A lullaby, maybe. Or just the remnants of a song they don't realize they're singing. It's easy to fall asleep like this. No artificial lights, no notifications, no electric buzz. Just breath, warmth, and the gentle orchestration of people settling down like ducks in a basket. The second sleep takes you gently, quieter than the first, less tangled in the body, more adrift. Somewhere, deep in the dark, an owl calls. You hear it but don't wake fully. It's part of the night's rhythm, like everything else. And tomorrow, it all begins again. The rekindling of fire, the gathering of fuel, the endless low-key battle with the cold. But right now, in this moment, you're warm enough. And in medieval winter, warm enough is about as good as it gets. Morning creeps in not with trumpets, but with creaks, coughs, and the sound of someone fumbling for their boots in the dark. You're not exactly ready, but you're also not fully asleep anymore. The house smells faintly of smoke and wool and that suspiciously eternal cabbage. As the second sleep thins, people begin moving like slow tides. You sit up, still wrapped in your cloak, and realize your breath is visible again. The fire's low, barely coals, but still alive. A win. Today, you're in for a treat. It's bath day. Don't get excited. Bathing in winter is not a spa experience. It's an ordeal. But it's also necessary, if not weekly, then at least when everyone starts politely avoiding eye contact. Which, judging by the sniff test, might be today. Your host family hauls in water, cold, sloshing, slightly muddy. It's poured into a big wooden tub near the hearth. Someone adds warm water from a pot, but it's not enough to make it steamy. Just enough to stop your heart from stopping when you step in. You're third in line. First is the father. Then two of the younger boys, dunked in quick succession while the mother scrubs behind their ears with something that looks like last year's sock. Baths are shared. Always. The water gets progressively less clear, and your turn becomes less refreshing cleanse and more historical soup. You try not to think about it too much. Still, there's something comforting in the ritual. The room is warm, the hearth flickers nearby, and someone's humming again. Soap is a luxury. When available, it's homemade, from animal fat and wood ash, and smells like exactly what it is. But it works. Sort of. There's a chunk of pumice for scraping off calluses, a twig with frayed ends for brushing teeth, and something called lye shampoo, which sounds like a threat but is apparently just very strong soap. You sit in the tub, knees to chest, trying not to scream as the cold water touches your spine. A dog watches you with judgmental eyes. The oldest daughter throws you a cloth and says, "Don't take too long. It gets worse the longer you think about it." She's not wrong. Historians still argue how often peasants bathed in winter. Church records complain about people avoiding public baths due to cold, while others reference once-a-month washing as completely respectable. What's clear is this: when people did bathe, they made it count. Once clean-ish, you're wrapped in a stiff, scratchy linen towel that might be older than the house. Someone hands you a fresh tunic. Well, fresh as in wasn't on the floor yesterday. You sit back down by the fire, hair dripping slightly, shivering until the warmth seeps in. Bath day also doubles as grooming day. Nails are trimmed with a knife. Lice are combed out with vinegar. Someone even plucks your eyebrows for luck. You don't ask. There's a casual intimacy in all of this. Everyone sees each other as they are, chilled, chapped, occasionally smelly, but no one comments. Winter is hard enough. Cleanliness is a shared kindness, not a fashion statement. After the baths, the mood lifts. There's more laughter, a bit more energy. One of the younger kids runs in circles to dry off faster. Another plays peekaboo with the towel. The mother takes a hot stone from near the hearth and wraps it in cloth to warm the bedding. A little luxury, but it makes all the difference. And you feel better. Not glamorous, not fragrant, but refreshed in the way only a medieval winter bath can provide. Cleaned, bundled, and dry enough to function, you sip a cup of weak herb tea. It tastes like warm leaves. You don't complain. Because in a world where warmth is hard-earned, every clean toe and dry armpit is a minor miracle. The sun climbs reluctantly, casting weak light through frost-spattered windows. You pull on your patched boots and woolen cloak, ready to face the day's next challenge, keeping the animals alive. In this rural medieval world, livestock aren't just money, they're warmth, food, and hope. Sheep's wool, cow's milk, chicken's eggs. Every creature is a vital cog in the peasant survival machine. You trudge through thick snow patches to the barn, the cold biting at your cheeks like a persistent mosquito. Inside, the air smells faintly of hay dust, and yesterday's straw beds, your new favorite scent, believe it or not. First order of business: checking the animals for frostbite or illness. You run your fingers over a sheep's ears, stiff but intact. A good sign. The chickens huddle under makeshift blankets of straw, eyes sleepy but alert. The pigs grunt quietly in their pens, insulated by thick piles of straw and mud. Caring for animals in winter is its own art form. You need to feed them more, but the fields are frozen solid. Stored hay gets rationed carefully. Water buckets freeze overnight and have to be chipped with a small wooden mallet each morning. No one has time for fancy water bowls that keep liquids warm. This is peasant life. There's a quirky tradition in some villages where animal care blends with superstition. For example, some believed whispering gently to cows encouraged them to produce more milk. Others swore by hanging sprigs of herbs above the stable door to ward off evil spirits that might chill the animals. You pause to observe a rooster, puffed up like a ball of fluff, standing sentinel near the barn door. It crows once, a brave, lonely sound cutting through the morning chill. Historians still debate how much of these practices were practical and how much were psychological, a way to exert control in an unpredictable world. Either way, the rituals provided comfort. After feeding and watering, You sweep the stable floors and replace damp bedding with fresh straw, trying not to think about how many vermin might be nesting in the old stuff. As you work, the dog trots over, tail wagging, and drops a frozen stick at your feet. You throw it awkwardly into a snowbank. The dog looks unimpressed. By the time you head back inside, your fingers are numb, but the animals are cared for. A small victory. Back near the fire, you wipe your hands on your cloak and listen to the soft murmur of the household stirring. Another day surviving the cold, one quiet task at a time. The afternoon stretches long and slow. Outside, the sky has turned the muted gray of wool felt, and a gentle snow begins to fall. Inside, the house feels cozy despite the chill lingering near the windows. You settle into a small corner by the fire, ready for some simple, hands-on work, spinning wool. You pick up a spindle, a deceptively simple tool made from a carved stick and a weighted whirl. It's nothing like the industrial yarn spinners of the future. This is old school, slow, rhythmic, meditative. As your fingers twist raw fleece, you can't help but admire how essential this craft is. Every thread you spin today could become a glove, a sock, or part of a warm cloak tomorrow. Spinning isn't just busy work, it's survival. Wool was a peasant's best friend during the cold months. Soft, insulating, and renewable. Villages often shared resources to get the job done, with the women gathering in groups to spin while chatting softly or humming tunes. Here's a fun detail. Some spinners believed that talking too much while spinning could weaken the thread. Others thought whispering to the wool helped it become stronger. You can see why historians still argue about whether these practices were superstition, habit, or clever ways to encourage mindfulness. As you spin, you feel the slow pulse of the work calming your mind. The steady turn of the spindle, the rough softness of fleece, and the warmth from the hearth create a cocoon of quiet focus. Nearby, the children play with simple wooden toys carved from scraps, their laughter light but muffled by thick walls and blankets. Every sound feels buffered, as if the world is wrapped in a soft quilt of snow and wood. Later, the family gathers around the table for a humble supper, a thick barley porridge with bits of dried fruit and honey, a treat in this frozen season. Food is modest, but shared with a sense of gratitude that you, sitting here now, might be surprised to feel. The day fades quietly. Outside, the snow blankets the village in white silence. Inside, the spinning continues, thread by thread, stitch by stitch, keeping warmth not just in wool, but in tradition and togetherness. The evening deepens as twilight filters through frost-lined windows, the fire's glow softening into embers. You find yourself drawn to the kitchen corner, where simple food preparation is underway, an essential ritual that sustains both body and spirit in the harsh winter months. Today's focus is on preservation, drying herbs, curing meat, and making salted cheese. You watch the mother expertly hang bunches of thyme and rosemary near the hearth, where the warmth will slowly draw out their moisture. The scent is comforting, earthy and faintly sweet, a natural perfume that brightens the heavy, cold air. Meat is scarce in peasant households, so every bit counts. Pieces are rubbed with salt, then carefully hung or buried in cool cellars. You marvel at how nothing goes to waste. Even the bones will be boiled into broth, the fat skimmed off and saved to fuel lamps or cooking fires. Salt itself is precious and often traded like currency, especially in northern villages where it's hard to come by. You recall that salt was sometimes called white gold, though trying to pay your rent with it probably wouldn't fly. Cheese making is an art form, too. You help press curds into wooden molds, the warm, tangy smell filling the room. It's slow work but necessary. Cheese can last through months of frozen fields when fresh milk is impossible to find. Amid this practical bustle, there's a quiet joy in food preparation. Stories are swapped, jokes exchanged, and the occasional kitchen mishap elicits gentle laughter, like when the cat darts underfoot, causing a near spill of the herb bundles. Historians still debate how much variety medieval peasants actually enjoyed in their diet. Some argue that even in winter, clever preservation and foraging meant their meals were more colorful than we might imagine. Others suggest the monotony was brutal, contributing to what we'd now call seasonal fatigue. For you, the warmth from the fire and the rhythm of preparing food become almost hypnotic. There's a timelessness here, a steady heartbeat of human resilience and resourcefulness. As night settles, the household gathers for a modest supper: bread, cheese, a splash of broth, eaten slowly to savor each bite. Outside, the wind howls faintly, but inside, the fire's glow holds the cold at bay. Night deepens beyond the small windows, and the household settles into the quiet pulse of bedtime routines. The fire burns low, casting a gentle flickering light that dances softly across the wooden beams overhead. You feel the day's weariness wrap around you like a heavy cloak, yet there's comfort in this shared stillness. Blankets are pulled tighter, the straw beds carefully arranged to catch the last warmth of the hearth. Children's sleepy murmurs blend with the crackling embers, and the dog curls up near the hearth, its rhythmic breathing a steady lullaby. The family whispers their prayers, asking for protection from the cold and the long night ahead. Their voices are hushed, reverent, and carry the weight of generations who faced winter's harshness without complaint. You imagine their hopes, small but fierce, floating upward like smoke from the chimney. Outside, the wind taps gently against the roof, a natural percussion that lulls you deeper into relaxation. You reflect on the day's quiet victories, the preserved food, the tended animals, the simple warmth found in the company of others. Historians still argue how medieval peasants perceived time during these long winter nights. Was it a season of hardship or a rare moment to slow down and reflect? Perhaps it was both, wrapped in a kind of peaceful endurance. Your eyes grow heavy. You feel the cold recede into the background, replaced by a steady warmth that comes from tradition, survival, and the small kindnesses shared under one roof. As you drift toward sleep, you carry with you the gentle sounds of a medieval village settling down. The soft breathing of loved ones, the distant call of an owl, the final flicker of a dying fire. Here, in this timeless moment, you are not just surviving the coldest nights. You are part of a story that has warmed hearts for centuries.